So, hi. If you're new to this channel, so am I. Not quite to this channel, but to the type of reaction videos. And this is something I'm gonna do. I don't know how many videos I'm gonna do, but this program that was on a few days ago on James O'Brien show on LBC is rather it's a hot topic at the moment, but I think there's an underlying agenda that is being pushed by people who O'Brien is definitely one of the leading voices of this agenda. He's definitely part of the establishment. He's an establishment voice. He also uses a thumbnail which was taken about 20 years ago, and he uses it as if it's still what he looks like now, because he's a conceited shit. Because he's a conceited man. He doesn't look like that anymore. He hasn't got as much hair. He's draining away. But yeah. Anyway, so what's this about? Have you crossed the line? It's about Gregg Wallace, who's in the news recently. So this may be being watched, I don't know, a week after. I upload it 2 weeks after, a year after, 3 years, 20 years after. So let me fill you in. Gregg Wallace is a British television personality. He's associated with cooking programs. He used to be a greengrocer, working and selling fruit and vegetable on the market. He's worked on market stalls when he was younger, and working on market stalls as a cockney from someone from the south of England, South London, basically. You have to be slightly extrovert in your manner because you're selling something. And cockney market stall holders usually make lots of innuendos. Gregg Wallace is not what you would call an intellectual. No. He's a cheeky chappy cockney. And his cheeky chappy cockney shtick is liked by a lot of people and pretty much disliked by an equal amount of people. But that's his shtick. So I'm not a big fan of Gregg Wallace. I've watched MasterChef on a few occasions. It's sometimes an interesting watch. MasterChef is a English cookery show. They do a normal pleb version and a celebrity version, obviously, where people go in and they have to cook a meal in a certain amount of time. It gets judged. Gregg Wallace is one of the judges. He's been doing it for a long time. Years and years. The show, as most of British TV, is heavily sexual innuendo based. It's true. A lot of sexual innuendo is in British television, especially daytime TV or general public type skill programs. If you ever watched, there used to be a gardening show called, I can't remember what it was called, Alan Titchmarsh, which is a sexual innuendo in itself, and Charlie Dimmock. For about 5, I don't know how long it lasts. It's probably on for an hour. There was sexual innuendo after sexual innuendo. Charlie Dimmock, famously at the time, not famously now, I don't think, used to do the show without a bra. She was a middle-aged woman with hanging tits everywhere. Not the birds, but this is an example of innuendo. And there was a builder on that show as well. Can't remember his name. But it was very popular at the time. And there was loads of sexual innuendo. Now, where does this line that James O'Brien is going to talk about, where is that line? This is what he's talking about. And his question, how? So he's going to tell you. He's not going to debate or question if there is a line, and should there be a line. He's going to tell you how Gregg Wallace, the allegations, because there's nothing physically actually factual yet. They're all allegations against Gregg Wallace. How they cross the line. Whose line is he talking about? Well, as all people on the left do, they talk about their line, and that's the line you can't cross. It doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. That's the line that's been set. They've set it. If you cross that line, you're either a bigot, a racist, a sexist, a misogynist. The list goes on. So Gregg Wallace, British TV personality, done very well for himself, and if compared to James O'Brien, there's very little debate about who I'd rather listen to. And I don't like Gregg Wallace, but I'd much rather share a very small caravan in East Wales for 5 months with Gregg Wallace than I would with this pompous blob. So anyway, what's he saying? Let's see.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is...
See the aging process there? From that thumbnail? Did you see that? Let's look at that again. So here he is.
The time. You are... Well, you know you are. You're listening to...
There he is. Pallid complexion, thinning hair, bloated face. From that. Same man? Don't think so. But he's not conceited or anything. No.
This is LBC.
Yes,
Extraordinary, because I've been saying it with such unerring frequency of late that it is completely losing all of its weight and impact. But Gregg Wallace, the presenter of MasterChef and various other programmes, is in a whole heap of trouble.
He's not in a whole heap of trouble. He's in a media-concocted storm. There's a difference. A whole heap of trouble may be if you've accidentally killed someone, or if you've had a car accident, or if something physical has happened. So he's not in a whole heap of trouble. He's only in a whole heap of trouble because you've decided he's in a whole heap of trouble.
Trouble that he managed to make considerably worse over the course of the weekend by...
Only because you think he made it considerably worse. He was trying to explain himself, as anyone would if there were allegations against them. But you're not allowed to do that, are you, James? You're not allowed to defend yourself against allegations.
Releasing a sort of defence, a self-filmed defence of himself against the allegations he is facing, which essentially... it did accuse middle-class women of a certain age.
There seems to be a problem with using adjectives in these days, unless that adjective is white man. You can't use adjectives anymore. To describe a group of people as middle-class women of a certain age is being descriptive. What's wrong with being descriptive?
Of being embarked upon some sort of conspiracy against him.
Not really. He's just saying that he doesn't agree with, or there's a group of this type of person who's making allegations against him. Again, can he not defend himself, James? What do you want him to do? Just say sorry, and then disappear?
Of course, the certain age would, I think, be pretty much the same age as him. So I'm not quite sure what the relevance there is, but I do find issues like this fascinating because they speak to genuine confusion, don't they? And it's a confusion that I think many of us have suffered from over the years.
What is this confusion he's talking about? Do we have confusion, or is it more how we are being manipulated, or how the left is building these ridiculous potholes for everyone to fall into? That the potholes didn't used to be there because people were less bothered about what people were saying and more bothered about what people did.
There are things that would make my hair stand on end in 2024 that
Yes, there's not much hair to stand on end there, James, is there?
I'm fairly confident I would have been almost supremely untroubled by in 2020. Certainly when I was on a national newspaper, the quotes banter end quotes was of a kind that my teenage daughters would find absolutely reprehensible.
Teenage daughters.
Well, and I have found, and no one wants to get holier than thou on a morning like
No, you do, James. You always get holier than thou.
this, or at least I don't.
At least you do. You're the main holier than thou person in the world.
But I have found that the best thing to do when you're in these circumstances is to ask other people, usually women, about where the boundaries are and why those boundaries are there.
Why? Why? Aren't we all allowed to have boundaries? Aren't we all allowed to have our own idea about what is acceptable? Why do we have to ask which women? Do women all have the same ideas? Do they all have the same ideas of what's acceptable? Women? Are women all the same, James? Any woman? Are they just a mass blob of the same political thought? I don't think so.
I'm blessed with having many, many women in my life who are capable of providing me with a little bit of guidance. So,
oh, good. Only if it's the guidance you want, I'm sure, James. Otherwise, you just ignore them. Or, like with people who ring into your show that you don't agree with, you probably belittle them. A lot of them are women who ring into your show and you make them feel like stupid idiots. What line is that you're crossing, Mr. O'Brien?
this morning, slightly tongue-in-cheek, I'll be honest, we were discussing
Tongue-in-cheek? That's a bit sexual innuendo, isn't it?
a story about sex workers in Belgium.
Is he imagining my tongue in my cheek? The dirty harridan.
Being able to sign a formal employment contract and gain labour rights on a par with other professions, which would include maternity leave and other things. And so,
story.
you know...
This is just a stupid story. I'm sure, I'm sort of positive it didn't happen. Because if this happened, then, I don't know, this man should have no recourse to a microphone broadcasting to the population.
You spend your life trying to be funny. You sort of might say something like, oh, what about paternity leave for the punter?
1, not funny at all. 2, no one ever would ever think of that. And 3, I'll go back to point 1.
In that kind of context,
happen.
Which is not a very good joke, but it's not over the line of what Gregg Wallace stands accused of doing. So I ask Eleanor, the producer, why it...
What's he saying there? Maternity leave for the punter. Why? I mean, sex workers work like anyone works. The punter would be the customer paying for a service. So the man at the garage who fixes your car, if he gets paternity leave, should we say that his customers should get paternity leave as well? I mean, it makes no sense.
Isn't it? And she said, quite rightly, because it doesn't make anyone feel uncomfortable. It's not specifically targeted at anyone. It's not...
Well, it's specifically targeted at the punters who use sex workers. If you were a punter who used sex workers, male or female, you might sort of feel a little bit targeted by that. But as we assume you're not someone who uses sex workers, James. nor is the producer on your show. They probably don't have an idea how punters for sex workers feel or would react to it. Pointless.
And it's not a particularly funny joke, but more importantly, it's not something that carries with it a heft, a weight, an impact that could trouble someone.
All language can trouble someone, you fool. Just because it doesn't trouble you doesn't mean that no one is troubled by it. Just because it doesn't trouble the target group that you want to defend and get antagonized for and outraged on behalf of, then what's the point? That's neither here nor there, is it? Obviously, if you're using language that doesn't have any impact at all, what's the point of using that language? You might as well keep your mouth shut, which would be very good advice for you, you bloated arse.
And I remember the first time this message was brought home to me was live on the radio. And at the time, if you are a familiar listener, if you are a regular listener to the programme, you probably know that...
If you are a regular listener, please try something else.
The story I'm going to share now, but there's a reason why I come back to it again and again, because it so perfectly for me encapsulates that line between what you heard some of Nick's callers towards the end of the programme saying, which was, well, I don't see what the problem is, this is all absolutely fine, and the knowledge that it isn't, the knowledge that young women, all women, have sensitivities that society has historically ignored, worse than ignored, ridden roughshod over or almost forever. I think age is relevant. I think the generational shifts mean that you would not put up now with things that your mother's generation had to put up with. One of the best examples...
Or put up with, or conversely, just got on with. How did they manage to get on with it? Because they didn't really give it a lot of thought or the level of bloody outrage that you do now. This is the problem with now, and definitely the problem with the left. They are crusaders for righteousness, whereas in the past the left didn't care. It was more likely the right that would both be dominant and also hate dominance.
Examples I have. So if I haven't explained myself properly, and I'll tell you the story in a minute in case you don't remember it. One of the best examples I have, what you're looking for is a line that was once completely commonplace, right? But which, when you stop to think about it, was actually outrageous, or at least obnoxious. So some...
One man's obnoxious is another man's funny. One man's obnoxious is another man's indifference. How? How can we begin to have this argument seriously? It's built on a bed of ridiculousness. Clever that.
Thing that you would have not batted an eyelid at. Well, as a man, you see.
Here we go. So this is important because he's not talking to women, even though women are a broad spectrum of ideas, politics, of nuance. He's not talking to women. He's talking to men, and he's completely, unless it involves him, he's just ladling all men into the same bucket.
Something that you as a man would not have batted an eyelid at in the 1970s. But...
Ooh, so long ago. A golden age, a lot of people now think. Definitely was a lot less bloody annoying.
Also perhaps not even in the 1980s or the 1990s.
Maybe
but
not.
Which, when you stop and think about it...
And why are we stopping to think about it now? Because we want to be outraged? Because we're looking for outrage? Because we're in the outrage years? Maybe.
You realise is beyond the pale. And what we're going to try and do in this hour is work out, for the people who need help, which may still include me, I hope not, but where the pale is. Where is this line between banter and obnoxiousness or employment issue.
Don't think we can ever find that line. He mentions employment issues. Obviously, at work, there are certain guidelines and rules and regulations that you have to follow. And maybe at work you can get in trouble for many things and generally not following the rules. So that's completely different to this sort of societal line that he's talking about.
Unacceptability. And so the line I often reach for at this point is one which I have heard men say, even while I have had this job. I've heard it said in this building. And it would involve a much older man saying to a much younger woman, gosh, if I was 20 years younger. Now, what's wrong with that?
Good question, James. I know you're going to tell me what you think is wrong with that, and be sure that everyone, when you hear his reaction when you hear him explain why it's wrong, you'll probably, like if you're anything like me, you'll probably start laughing or feel a bit bemused. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very innocuous comment. But let's hear him describe and explain to you why it is.
The room will divide at this point into people who can clearly see what is wrong with that and people who think there's nothing wrong with it at all.
You won't actually divide in why it's not good in the way he's going to tell you, because it's bizarre the way he explains why it is. There may be some people who find it a little bit odd, but most people, I think, it's a turn of phrase. Anyway, let him crack on.
Not sure there's much of a grey area, and that's why this kind of issue is fascinating. So we often operate in the grey areas, but what if there aren't any? So
you never operate in grey areas, James. It's either black or white to you. This is why anyone who rings your show and disagrees with you, you've got no time for them at all. You have no time to listen to someone else's opinion or point of view. That's not what you're in the business for. You're in the business to ridicule people who don't agree with you. And you do it quite well, to be honest. I mean, it's bloody annoying, but well done.
You say that, an older man in a work environment usually means he's in a position of senior.
Or an older woman. Lots of women, lots of older women, I'm sure have used this phrase. He's forgetting about women because it doesn't suit him at the moment. His crusade is against men. Now, the whole idea that there may be, like, men and women are pretty much the same, which we're always told, like with the Kamala Harris election campaign, the left would say, it doesn't matter. It's not important that she's a woman, or it's not important she's black. And then in the next breath say, it's amazing she's a woman, and it's amazing she's black.
Authority, a position of power, says to a younger woman, and remember, he thinks this is some sort of compliment.
It is a compliment, you dick. Of course it's a compliment. It's a compliment, but not in the way you think it is. It's a compliment. It's a way of saying you're very pretty, or you look nice. And we'll dissect later how ridiculous it is that he thinks any comment or any compliment can be acceptable in the way he explains why it isn't, why this isn't.
He certainly thinks this is banter. He says something like, oh, if I was 20 years younger. Now, he doesn't go...
It's not banter, it's a compliment. It just basically means you look nice or you're pretty. It's not banter.
Into any detail. He doesn't need to write the second half of that sentence, although sometimes they will. But
no, you never write the second. No one ever writes the second half of it. Because if you write the second half of it in the way you're going to explain what it means, you're weird. And you're sexually odd, like you are for actually about to explain what the second half is. The second half doesn't need to be explained. And it's not part of if I was 10 years younger. There is another phrase, I'd give her one, or I'd give him one, meaning that I'd go to bed with them, I'd have sex with them. Again, that's a little bit more riskier than if I was 10 years younger or 20 years younger. But again, it's basically just saying she's pretty or he's handsome. That's it. Anyway, I'm going to let him explain more why he thinks this is beyond the line.
The point is this: he is thinking about that much younger woman, that much less powerful woman in the context of this kind of conversation, in an explicitly and obvious sexual way.
Power's got nothing to do with it. Many men in this situation who say this are acknowledging that they have no power. It's not a power thing at all. If it was a power thing, that man would just go out and get that woman. I'm going to let him continue, then we'll have a listen to it.
He is imagining himself having sex with her on some level, and he doesn't realise how unpleasant an experience that will be for her. The other thing he is doing, which I think you probably could chalk up as blokish absurdity, is he's imagining that the woman would have been interested in him had he been 20 years younger, which is an act of such arrogant presumption that goodness only knows what the correct response is. So there is a wonderful example of something that some people, even now listening to this program, will think is completely innocuous, something that almost everybody of a certain age, to borrow Gregg Wallace's unfortunate language.
It's all right for you to use it, though. Why is it unfortunate language? You're using a descriptive phrase to convey information. How can it be unfortunate?
Will have heard somebody else say, or will have had directed at them, or will, God forbid, have actually said themselves, with, I think, a fair degree of defence allowed on the grounds that you'd never stop to think about how obnoxious it actually was. So
anyway, the problem with how he's just explained it, the position of power aspect is nonsense. A man in power, in a powerful position, who is prepared to use that power to get what he wants, would get what he wants. He would use his power to actually physically go to bed with that woman, regardless of how much younger she is than him. That would be power. Saying, if I was 20 years younger, is conceding your power, is admitting you have no power, because you would have to be 20 years younger to even begin that journey of possibility. Another problem with what he says is that he's saying that every word we say, we have to consider how someone else may emotionally react to that, but not also react to that, but also extrapolate meaning within what we've said that isn't necessarily what we've mentioned. Because I'm sure a lot of you at home now, if you had to explain the phrase, if I was 10 years younger or 20 years younger, you would not go into the explanation that he has just done. The majority of you, I'm pretty sure, would just say it means it's a compliment to someone who's younger than you that you think is pretty, like saying you're pretty or you're beautiful. So if you say you're beautiful, does that mean you're imagining yourself in bed with someone? No. But you're admiring their physical nature. And again, it's something else he'll say later on that we'll come back to. Anyway, I'm pretty much done. This video we've banged on quite a lot. and I'm free forming my opinions, having watched it a few times during this video. We'll watch a little bit more, and I think we'll just bring this video to an end.
There's the line. That man is thinking consciously about sexual relations with that woman.
So, basically, the situation he's got is everyone who says this phrase is actively in their head picturing themselves having sex with a woman, with the woman. Which again, there's another problem with that, is that are we not allowed to have imaginations? Is someone imagining themselves having sex with you relevant or possible that can you take offense from someone imagining having sex with you? Is that the same now as someone like essaying you? Is that the same? So, and how can you possibly know what someone's imagining at any point of the day to actually then start thinking, I bet he's imagining touching my bottom. Ooh, feel awful. You can't, you dick. I'm imagining slapping you round the face now, James, and you're probably not that happy about that. But I'm not doing it.
It's not something you should ever be airing in public.
They haven't aired it in public.
Certainly not with somebody in a junior position to you, or someone who perhaps...
So who can you do it to? Are the people you can do it to? It's especially not that. So what? Who can you do it to? Someone in a professional, in a higher position? If you're a janitor cleaning the bogs, can you say it to the boss or the manager? Is that all right? You're an idiot, James.
Lies upon your patronage for their livelihood. But the one that sticks with me, and has stuck with me now for the best part of 20 years, because it came up quite early in this job, quite wet behind the ears, where I think I would have been a little bit closer to the, I don't really understand what all the fuss is about school.
No, that would have been a time when you weren't taken over by the woke mind virus that perceives and pervades everything that the left or the old left now espouses.
Of thought. And it involves a woman who...
Anyway, this is the next nonsense bit of stuff that he comes out with. I'm sure he just made these stories up as well. That's enough for this video. I'm going to see if I can edit it down a bit, because I've been chattering on for about half an hour. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, or it's given some insight. This, the reason why I find, and I'm going to do a series on this just this program alone. I think it's about a 30-minute segment that he goes on about, and there are some callers calling in. The reason why I'm going to look at this is because there is something much more prevalent that's happening societally, not just in England at the moment, but in generally Europe, America. And this is a really good example of what's happening. So hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe, if I can get the next one filmed, then you can tune in for that. Like and subscribe, because it'll show me that somebody at least has watched it. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.